I know and you know, John, it's expensive to take care of our veterans, but it would be morally wrong not to do so. And one of the things that your budget will allow us to do in the VA is to help bring down a backlog of $5 billion in needed serious maintenance and repairs in our VA hospitals. We should never again have one soldier face the kind of housing conditions they faced at Walter Reed Annex 18. And with this funding, we're going to see that no soldier, no veteran, no Marine, no Air Force veteran ever has to face rat-infested housing in the VA system, or be in a facility that has mold in the walls and ceilings. Shame on the nation for allowing that to happen.
It's one thing to have that rhetoric. It's another thing to put the resources in place that really address the problem you're talking about.
Absolutely. I realize that money doesn't solve every problem, but you can't get rid of mold in a housing complex for Army soldiers or for Air Force retirees or veterans unless you have the money to fix that. And so that's what this budget's going to let us do. Is it cheap? No. But would it absolutely be a moral wrong if we didn't take care of our veterans? It clearly would be.
Now, when we talk about veterans health care, that's only part of the total veterans programs. There are other programs, principally including disability compensation.
You bet.
And as I understand it, that's about a little bit less than what we're talking here, but it's another $30–35 billion in and of itself.
That's right. And one of the big problems we have with so many veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan that have service-connected disabilities, wounds that they incurred through their combat service. The VA has just been swamped, and they're trying to do the best they can, but a combat wounded veteran coming back from Iraq shouldn't have to wait 177 days on average to get his or her benefits worked through the VA system. So I'm excited that this budget will let us reduce that backlog and take care of those veterans. Those are earned benefits.
When we talk about defense and about the cost of national defense, we typically look at the function we call 050 in the budget, that is national defense and DOE and Department of Energy and the nuclear weapons program, as well as the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. But we often don't recognize that this is a cost of national defense too, an ongoing cost. Absolutely. And by the same token, we've got a whole new rubric in the budget, a whole new program called Homeland Security. Mm-hmm. And when we add all that up together, we're really spending pretty historic rates on national defense, broadly considered.
Yeah. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, I believe the budget we passed this year under your leadership fully funds the President's request for national defense and spends more than the administration wanted to spend on Homeland Security. And I am involved in the program that puts nuclear detection devices at foreign seaports place to prevent a terrorist from putting in a ship container in Singapore a nuclear bomb that could kill more Americans in 1 minute than we've lost in every war since the Revolutionary War until today's war in Iraq. And so I'm thrilled that through the Energy and Water Subcommittee I sit on, your budget resolution will let us help better protect America compared to what the administration had in its request.
One thing that's not been recognized in this debate over the supplemental appropriation bill, which Congress is now pending and negotiating with the President, one of the things that's not been recognized is that your committee, the Appropriations Committee, said we're tired of waiting on these supplementals from the President. We're going to put $70 billion in anticipated funding for Iraq and Afghanistan in this year's budget, in the base budget. What we're now funding is another $96 billion on top of that $70 billion,
right,
which is the cost of Iraq and Afghanistan and enhanced North American security, all three. Most of it is Iraq. But we put a substantial sum in the budget so that we would provide for a bridge to when we have the supplemental coming up.
Right.
As we argue about the supplemental, is there any doubt in your mind that the money will be there when it's needed?
Not for a second. And I want any veteran, I want any loved one of a military person serving in Iraq or Afghanistan around the world to know the Congress and the President will provide the funds to support our troops in harm's way and provide for training and support for our troops here at home. I know there are honest differences on some of the details of that legislation, but at the end of the day, we will pass a bill and we'll probably have it on the President's desk before the bill was passed last year in the previous Congress.
And it'll fully fund their request.
Not only fully fund it, but in the supplemental appropriation bill to fund Iraq. And through my subcommittee, we added $1.7 billion more to help take care of veterans' needs.
That's important. A lot of these added-ons go right to core needs. They're not frills. In fact, the frills were dropped out. The spinach money, for example,
you bet,
was passed but then reconsidered and dropped. And that's true for most of the unrelated expenditures in the emergency supplemental.
Well, let me tell you what we're going to do with this extra money for veterans. We're going to see that every veteran coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan is screened for traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes there's a concussion and they're in a Humvee and an IED blows up the Humvee. There's maybe not a physical wound, but the concussion has created a real trauma within their skull. And we're going to try to test every veteran, because if you can find those cases early, you can better treat them. We're going to better test veterans for mental health care issues, because understandably, walking on patrol for a year, not knowing if your next step will be your last, creates a lot of mental challenges for the strongest and best of Americans. And this money will help us better treat the mental health care needs for our veterans. We will create more polytrauma centers for those who are the most severely wounded with brain injuries. And this supplemental, based on what we've done in Congress, is going to do right by our veterans.
And that was added by Congress. When we did, for example, a budget and put in the extra $5.5 billion for veterans health care, we specifically said we want to see a significant share of this money go to PTSD, go to brain and spinal cord injuries, which frankly have not gotten enough attention. Not blaming anybody, we're just now beginning to recognize that this is the nature of the war we're fighting.
Well, we all hear the debate, support our troops. We ought to support our troops with our words, but even more importantly in Congress, we ought to support our troops with our deeds. And by adding billions of more funding in the Iraqi supplemental bill for defense health care and $1.7 billion to improve VA health care for our veterans, we are supporting our troops in a truly tangible and important way.
I don't want to leave that subject without thanking you for everything you've done to help us at Shaw in particular, but throughout South Carolina with military construction, which is also under your jurisdiction.
Well, thanks, John. Like Texas, South Carolina has a proud tradition of service in the military and to our country, and we ought to be grateful to our communities who support our military installations, but as you would agree, most importantly, we ought to treat our heroes well with our words and our deeds. And that's why I'm proud of this new budget of yours. It's going to do more for our veterans and our servicemen and women and the unsung heroes of our nation's defense, military families. We'll do more from them than the administration had asked for in their budget.
Let's go now to a different part of the spectrum of issues and talk about children. Two things in particular: their education, because I believe that the education of our children is absolutely critical, like never before, to America's future. And secondly, their health care. And in truth, the two are linked together, because if you have a sick child, that child's not learning. And one of the programs that we created in the Budget Act of 1997, when we balanced the budget, we nevertheless said there's some priorities that need attention. One was the Children's Health Insurance Program, paid for by cigarette taxes, frankly, by tobacco taxes. This year we have said we're going to substantially enlarge that program because it expires. And when we renew it, the plan is to try to cover another 8 million children who are not covered by the program today, which means that just about every child in America then will have either health insurance their parents provide them or health insurance through this program. How do we square that with the so-called pay-go rule?
Well, I know we have to have the discipline to pay for these programs, and that may be cutting out waste in other parts of the budget. It may be cutting loopholes for companies that renounce their American citizenship and buy a P.O. box in Bermuda. We have to pay for it one way or another. But I think it is important we make an investment in our children. And as you said, a healthy child is a better student. And this Children's Health Insurance Program is one that not only helps children be able to catch diseases in an early stage where they won't have life-threatening illnesses, and not only help them be better students, but it actually is encouraging parents to stay off welfare and go to work.